Welcome back to the Runaways YouTube channel. Today I have a treat. It's a deck tech for the Viserai deck that I took to calling Auckland. I ended up going 8-3, which was good for 15th place. Really think that if I had played pretty good on day one, didn't make some crucial mistakes, that I had a really good shot of potentially even winning the entire tournament. And I think that the deck is very well positioned for the current metagame. So I would describe this as basically like a Viserai good stuff deck. It plays all the usual suspects for Viserai cards. You got Mordred Tide, Sonata Arcanix, Revel and Runeblood, Swarming Gloomveil. These are like your power cards. And then I play 3 Rattlebones, which is a little bit higher than most. And I play Mavrian Skies. I only play 8 instead of all 9. I play Shrill of Skullform. All the good stuff. Where my deck deviates, I think, from most other Viserai decks is that I am playing Crown of Dominion. So I think Dynasty basically gave Viserai 2 really good cards, Crown of Dominion being one of them. Crown of Dominion really, I think, pairs currently best with Viserai because of Viserai's hero power. Viserai's hero power reads whenever you play a Runeblade card. If you played another non-attack action card this turn, create a Rune Chant token. So essentially, Viserai's hero power scales with the number of cards that you can play per turn. So if you ever get to play like a 5-6 card hand, your hero just naturally scales you with like the more cards that you play. And as such, Cashin is really strong in Viserai. And then the other card that got in Dynasty is Deathly Duet. And so at face value, this is basically like another copy of Spellblade Assault, usually. Sometimes it's a yellow Shrill of Skullform. But I think just having another 2-cost attack really adds a lot of consistency, particularly one that can generate rune chants, because then it makes your cards like Rune Flash, like Amplify the Arcanite, which have rune chant cost reductions just a lot better. And one of the things that was true for Viserai pre-Dynasty was that I felt like Rune Flash was in part of some of your strongest turns, but in general was pretty inconsistent to be playing, especially if you ever had to pay 2 or 3 in order to play this card. But having Deathly Duet in addition to Spellblade Assault kind of fixes all of those problems. And so as such, we can now play 3 Rune Flash, basically have 6 copies of Red Spellblade Assault in the deck. One thing that I wanted to go over at the beginning is just what the attack and non-attack ratios that I like are. I'm playing 28 attack actions, 32 non-attack actions, and this is pretty much the spread that I have for most matchups. And I found that this, in my opinion, is the best ratio for Viserai. Mostly being that you want your deck to be skewed a little bit more towards non-attack actions, since your worst hands are going to be the ones where you draw 3 or 4 attacks. And really, 3 attack hands are, for the most part, only playable with Mavrian Skies, and you need one of your attacks to be blue. And then, so for that reason, you have a lot of cards in your non-attack action slot that kind of bail you out from drawing like all non-attack action hands. This is not like Briar. You have Rattlebones, Sonata Arcanix, and even Become the Arcanite lets you tutor by discarding one of your non-attack actions for an attack action card. And so I think having all of these tools in your kit makes it so that you really want to be skewing a little bit more. I've played as low as, I think, 27 attacks, 33 non-attacks, but I think that kind of a setup is usually better if you're more oriented towards playing like OTK, and where you actually spend like 1 or 2 turns just like making rune chants. And that's not really the case in the current metagame. There's no matchup where you really are only making rune chants at the beginning of the game, except maybe against Oldham. And so for the most part, I like 28 attacks. If you look at the deck list, you'll see that I don't play any attack action cards, and I also don't play Arcanite Shard. And I know that Pummel's pretty popular currently among a lot of Viserai players, but I just think that the percentages just go way down. So your base percentages, assuming your attacks and non-attack actions for Sonata Arcanix are somewhat even, is that if you play a Sonata Arcanix where X is 0, if you have a roughly even split of attacks and non-attacks left in your deck, it's about 75% chance to get a card. And if you pay 2 into the Sonata Arcanix, it's about 90% chance to get a card, at least one card with the Sonata. But when you start introducing cards like Arcanite Shard, defense reactions, attack reactions into the mix, it actually reduces your percentage by quite a bit per card. So you might go from like 75% to like 70% if you play like a set of attack reactions, and it's just really, like, in my opinion, like bringing the percentage down like a little bit too low for my liking. And as a result, this Sonata Arcanix really impacts like how it is that we choose to build our deck, especially with like the blues that we're choosing to play. We play only 8 blue attack action cards so that we can still potentially get a blue off of Sonata Arcanix, which comes up from time to time. The blues that I've chosen are Shell of Skull form, just being like the highest damage that you can really get on a blue, actually on rate. Usually with like a red card if you have Mob Rinse guys. Spellblade Assault Blue I played because it's the best attack to be playing on turn 0. And for some of the other turns, when you do have something like a Rune Flash, Assault is really like the card that you want. It's the most consistent. And Vexing Malice Blue, this is, in my opinion, one of the most important blues for the Oldham matchup. Being able to do 2 arcane damage in one source helps you close those games out. I'm playing Looming Doom as one of my non-attack actions, and before anybody really goes crazy, this is probably the worst card in the deck. Most of the time I am not playing this card at all. The only matchup I think where you could even like really consider playing Looming Doom is against Dromai, just because you can use the Looming Doom to hit dragons, and so it kind of reduces the burden that you have to continually have go against Dromai. But it's like the first card that I cut against Aggro, so that's pretty much it for that card. It's nice because it blocks 3, and that it costs 3, so your Icelander can't brain freeze it out of your hand. Speaking of block 3, the deck actually blocks pretty well. In most setups, the only 2 blocks that you're going to have in your deck are going to be Sonata Arcanix, Revel on Runeblood, and the Mob Rinse guys. So less than a quarter of your deck is going to be block 2s, which is not a bad place to be, where the rest of your deck blocks 3. This is pretty different, I think, from a lot of Viserai decks, which play a lot more 2 blocks in their deck. If you notice, I'm not playing Runeblood Incantation, for example, for that reason. Runeblood Incantation, besides being a block 2, is just kind of below curve. You pay 1, and then you get 3 damage out of it over the course of 3 turns, and so oftentimes it just ends up being like a little bit too awkward to play. The only rune chant generators that we're playing is 3 copies of Read the Runes Red. Read the Runes being really good because it's just a 1-card hand. You just play it during your setup and block with the rest of your cards. And Revel on Runeblood being like one of your most powerful cards, just like basically a 0 for 5, essentially. On the topic of 0 cost cards, one card that I'm playing that a lot of other people aren't playing is Arcanic Crackle. And the main reason being that Rattlebones is like your best extender, and Rattlebones works best with 0 cost attacks. Rattlebones swarming Gloomveil, or sometimes if you have the action point, playing Rattlebones and a free Amplify the Arcanite is usually like the best use case for the card. And so having an additional 0 cost attack that you have in the deck, especially in the aggro matchups, to potentially block with early on and to put it in your graveyard so that you can Rattlebones later as an extension is really nice. To talk about the rest of the equipment choices, I'm playing 2 chess pieces, Aether Ironweave and Findal Spring Tunic. Aether Ironweave is going to be the chest piece that you play most of the time, because Viserai actually has quite a hard time utilizing the extra resource. The only real benefit that you get out of playing an extra resource is by using your spellbound creepers, but it's also very difficult to make use of the extra action point off of your spellbound creepers unless you're playing like a free attack. And so most of the time, Aether Ironweave is just going to end up being better, letting you play the spellbound creepers and paying for like a 1-cost attack. Like Amplify the Arcanite usually ends up costing 1 in those scenarios. Or most commonly, you're going to end up using it to like play a Rattlebones for free, and then you banish a 0-cost attack with the Rattlebones, and that's really going to be what you use to kind of spike the damage on your turns. I'm playing Arcane Barrier 3, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when we go over our Icelander sideboard strategy. All of the common matchups I have are going to be included in the Viserai deck link that is going to be posted in the description. Tunic, I, for the most part, play only against Oldham and Icelander because in those matchups, having the extra resource is pretty important to be able to actually play out your turns. And then the rest of it is pretty standard. So let's just go over like a default like aggro setup. You're going to be playing Crown Dominion for cash in, and then all your armor pieces. And basically what I cut out is the 9th Blades, 2 to 3 copies of Read the Runes. So if you were going second instead of going first, I would just put in this Oath of the Arcanite instead of this copy of Read the Runes. And you just like cut some of the blues out so to make space to play cash in. It's pretty straightforward. Your game plan should just be to try to draw cash in, play a cash in turn. Cash in ends up a lot of the times doing kind of like a Mask of the Pouncing Lynx impression for Viserai, because ends up going like around +5, being that it is your non-attack action starter. So you get a 1 rune chant out of Viserai just from playing the cash in, compared to any other turn that you normally would have had. And then if you can convert the extra card into, you can usually convert it into 4 or 5 damage through Viserai's hero ability plus like playing something else. And so you end up being able to put together these roughly like 25, 30 point turns, which makes it very difficult for the other deck to come back against, especially if you got to set up any rune chants at all in the first turn. Against Bravo or Dorynthia, these are kind of like race matchups where they're going to be presenting on hits that you have to deal with. That's when the Sink Belows come in. You can play Sigil of Suffering for Sink Below. It's a little bit higher variance, but a little bit more power. I feel that Viserai should be favored in these matchups anyways, because your average turn is just going to end up being a little bit more damage than what either Bravo or Dorynthia can put out. And so really your main goal is to try to not lose to them, so don't put yourself in a position where you're going to be like too low, so you have to block out the Bravo, trying to block their crush effects when they don't dominate them as best as you can. And I think having like all the 3 blocks in your deck really does a lot to help mitigate that. Other than that, like you're just going to, your main source of advantage in the matchup is just going to be playing like your 3-card Marvin Sky's hands, and so just like setting up whenever possible. I cut the Sonata Arcanix for this matchup because you're playing the Sink Belows. Into Dromai. Dromai, you also want to be playing Crown of Providence instead of playing Cash In. I feel like my strategy towards Dromai is to understand that, again, Marvin Skies is like one of your best cards, because normally the way that Marvin Skies turns are costed, even if your attack doesn't hit, you end up going a little bit plus, but being able to kind of guarantee a hit on Marvin Skies on the Dromai's Dragons makes it so that any turn that you play Modern Skies, you just end up going extremely plus. And so the most important thing that you can do against Dromai is to just like not take too much damage, not like be forced to going into like a blocking pattern against them, so, which means that you actually can afford to block a little bit more. Overall, you don't have to just like dump your Modern Skies. If they have an empty board, you can arsenal it and then just play the game a little bit slower. You play Crown of Providence because one of the key ways that they have to net advantage against you is from playing stuff like Command and Conquer. And so just being able to shut that out for them, I think, gives you a lot of advantage. You only play 5 poppers, but I don't think that you really need any more than that. You just need to keep them honest and just try to get advantage from playing Modern Skies. I'm playing only 1 Rune Flash in this matchup. I'm playing the Arcana Crackles instead because I think that having the ability to play smaller turns while setting up a Modern Skies is pretty important, but you could also like switch out the Arcana Crackles for the Rune Flashes if you feel like it's going to be a little bit better. It took me a lot of games to really figure out the best strategy to play against Icelander. I came to the conclusion that having like a semi-setup AB3 plan ends up being the highest win rate, and for the most part, when you play against Icelander, you want to try to make it so that they have a difficult time playing the game efficiently. And you do that by taking a lot of turns off. So when you play cards like Read the Runes, it lets you block out their Wounded Bulls, Find those Fighting Spirits. You can block like 2 or 3 cards, play Read the Runes, and then just make it overall pretty awkward for them to play. A lot of them are going to be submitting Alluvion and Constellus against Viserai. And so if you take turns off and you don't do arcane damage every turn, it actually ends up creating some inefficiencies on their end. If you give them 5 cards, it's oftentimes difficult for them to utilize all 5. And the other thing that is pretty important is just that you play for your Findale Spring Tunic. So most of the time when you are taking a Modern Skies turn, because the resource curve is so tight, you will get disrupted by a Frostbite. And it's usually not worth it to be taking extra damage in order to just like throw Modern Skies at them. It's usually a lot better to block. So the turns that you can attack, you want to just like be using the Findale Spring Tunic as your insurance instead of using your life points to not block with a card. Knowing what to set in your arsenal in the matchup is one of the most important things. So you want to be putting things in your arsenal that are very flexible and easy to play out of your arsenal immediately. The card in particular that you just don't want to kind of get caught out by is Cold Snap. So Modern Skies is your best arsenal card, and then after that, probably something like Rattle Bones, Amplify the Arcanite, just things that you want to be playing at the beginning of your turn. You can arsenal Deathly Duet or Spellblade Assault. Those are also pretty good arsenals. Revel in Runeblood, for example, is a very bad arsenal card, but it's pretty good when you can just have the opportunity to play it. And so actually I end up discarding this card a lot when I get Coronet Peaked. Other than that, pretty straightforward. I cut Rune Flashes actually in this matchup. Rune Flash is really good when you get to play your hands out, but when your opponent is presenting a lot of disruption, a lot of times it can just end up being like a 3 for 4, which is not really where you want to be. So in this situation, I just end up cutting them out because it's somewhat unrealistic to be expecting to play like really big hands against Icelander. You just want to be doing like a little bit of setup instead and making rune chance and using that to be able to play like larger damage turns. Lexi is a pretty similar matchup against Aggro. You just have to take it like a little bit slower. So Lexi is kind of like a hybrid between how I play against Oldham and how you play against Aggro. You have all your armor. So it's like one of the matchups that is actually like a little bit harder, but you just want to be able to find like the space to be able to play like your Modern Skies turns when they give you the opportunity and to block efficiently when you can't. Oldham is one of the matchups that I feel the most comfortable in. I play Crown Dominion. I think that's a big difference from how most other Viserais play it. I think that against Oldham, being able to take large turns is kind of like your biggest advantage into them. So being able to do like rune chant setups while blocking for a portion of the game, so that you can play cards like Ninth Blade is really strong. And the other thing that is really good against them is being able to take like a cash in turn, for example, and being able to output like a lot of damage on a single turn. You don't need to play all three cash-ins because subsequent cash-ins are actually pretty bad. Drawing the second cash-in, if you have Tunic, so you just pitch a Tunic, pitch a blue and use Tunic is not too bad. But you don't really want to be drawing too many cash-ins, but having one cash-in turn is pretty strong against Oldham. And the other card that's really good against Oldham is Revel and Runeblood. Just being able to spike your arcane damage for a turn almost always guarantees that you wipe out their arsenal, but you want to make sure that you use Revel and Runeblood on turns where you're like stacking your damage. So on like Mordred Tide turns, or you might sometimes just want to keep the Revel and Runeblood so that you can go from like a 15 damage turn to like a 20 damage turn is better than pushing your like 9 damage turn into a 14-15 damage turn, for example. Other than that, pretty straightforward. I don't think that it's a good idea for the most part to play defense reactions against Oldham. The only exception would be if they all start playing like red disables. Then if they're attacking your arsenal a lot more, then maybe you want to play Crown of Providence and maybe Sink Belows. But for the most part, I think this should be a favored matchup. You just want to do your setups, play Read the Runes, do like a Rune Chant Ninth Blade setup, and then play into like a large cash-in turn. And after that, you can kind of close out with your weapon and Vexing Malice. And so that's pretty much it. I will be including a link to the deck with all of the matchups kind of set up. I really do think that Viserai is one of the better decks to be playing currently. I think that the positioning is really strong given the ban and suspend changes. The fact that Viserai was losing before to Fi and Icelander and Oldham, and all three of these matchups, basically his opponent, his like worst matchups, got a hit in a meaningful way for the matchup. I think makes it so that Viserai was a really good choice for the tournament. And if I played a little bit better on day one, I think we all would have gotten to see the results. That being said, 8-3 is not a bad record, and so I hope you guys all have fun and maybe learn something from this deck tech, and we'll be trying this build out in your future events. Thanks, and see you guys on the next one.